Fantasy Fuel is powered by Pole Sports. Get instant fantasy football advice through real-time polls by visiting polesports.com.
I'm just going for a ride. If things don't add up, it's hasta luego, you know what I mean?
All right, welcome back to another edition of R.I.D.E, Realistic Individual Defensive Evaluations. There's going to be more than one this week since we have come to the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC East. But before we get to that, there's a couple things we got to talk about. Just today, as I'm recording this, we have found out that Tyreek Hill, at the moment, is not going to get suspended. And I do not even know what to think about this. It is insane. After everything we have heard, how do we get away with nothing? Nothing. It's insane to think that somebody can threaten another human being in recorded audio and not get at least a couple of game suspension. Maybe the league is feeling some backlash from all the previous suspensions. I'm not sure. We'll go over more of this on our extended normal Fantasy Fuel edition Monday night when we record, so I won't go into it too much right now, but it will be a topic of conversation. But to the matter at hand, we're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles today and some other somewhat exciting news for those of us who have been fans of this player even before he was on the Eagles. I love Darren Sproles, and he is coming back for another year. I don't know what he's got left in the tank, but man, when he is on the field, he gives it his all, and that's all I can ask from that guy. So thank you, Darren Sproles, for what you've done. Hopefully you've got another championship run in your future. But we're talking defense, so no more offense. Let's get to the defense. We're talking Philadelphia Eagles, and I couldn't just pick one guy. So you're getting a rundown of the Eagles defense, but I'll probably focus a little bit on their defensive backfield since they were weak there last year. But I think it's going to be a little bit, well, fantasy-wise, it's going to be a stronger option in the defensive backfield this year. And you're not going to have to spend probably any pick on most of these guys. These are guys that you'll be able to pick up in free agency in your IDP leagues. But let's run down the roster. We'll start with the defensive line. We've got Brandon Graham. He has been a staple on this Eagles defensive line. We love Brandon Graham. He was our, well, how do I put this? He was supposed to be the savior on the defensive line. It didn't quite turn out that way for Brandon Graham. He's had a couple of good years. Last year, he only had 4 sacks. I expect more this year out of Brandon Graham because their defensive line isn't as stacked as it has been. Playing across from him is Derek Barnett. Now, Derek Barnett, I am expecting big things. I think he could be a steal in IDP leagues if you have to use more than one defensive end or more than one defensive lineman in general. Derek Barnett is a great option this year because he is going to be on the field more. The depth chart that I'm looking at, they basically only list one starter at defensive end, which of course will be Brandon Graham. But Derek Barnett is the next guy on the list with the next highest snap percentage. They'll rotate in some Vinny Curry and maybe a little bit more Josh Sweat this year at defensive end. But it's going to be Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett. And I think Derek Barnett is going to have a great year. I would not be surprised if he had double-digit sacks. Maybe I'm dreaming. Of course, everything you take from me today, you might have to take with a little bit of grain of salt since I am a giant Eagles fan. But that's okay. Now, in the middle of this line, we've got Fletcher Cox and Malik Jackson and Timmy Jernigan. They're going to have a good rotation. Now, that being said, Fletcher Cox had an amazing season last year. I believe he ended up at like number 3 or 4 overall in the NFL Top 100 on some site. And he deserved it. He had an amazing year. And if you have to play defensive tackles, he is a guy that is worth getting. Now, do I think he's going to repeat his performance from last year? No, I do not. He had 10 sacks. That's the only time in his career he's gotten double-digit sacks. He has had 9.5 before, but it's usually around that 5 to 6 mark. And he had 33 tackles last year, which was higher than the previous 2 years. But because, and now this is an if everybody stays healthy in the middle of that defensive line, Fletcher Cox is not going to play as much as he did last year. He had a really high snap percentage last year, so he was on the field more and he was able to get more sacks. So, this year is probably not going to be as fantasy amazing as it has been previously. We could talk about the Eagles linebackers, but really, everybody out there kind of knows what you're getting out of Eagles linebackers. Nigel Bradham's going to be on the field a lot. And then they're going to mix in some Zach Brown, maybe some Paul Warlow if he is actually healthy. Kamu Grugier-Hill, he's going to be out there. We got some L.J. Fort, Nate Gary. It's kind of just a mishmash of whatever. If you're in a deep league, Bradham is okay. I mean, he's nothing spectacular. He's going to get you 60-some tackles pretty much every year, a couple sacks, a few pass defenses, and a few tackles for a loss. But he's basically a fill-in. I'm not relying on Nigel Bradham. And any of the other linebackers, if Zach Brown can give me anything, I will be happy. I mean, the last couple of years he's had 84 and 94 tackles. And 70 last year. But he doesn't get much for sacks. He doesn't get a lot of flashy stats. But if he can produce, in limited time, I'll be happy as an Eagles fan. I'm not expecting much fantasy-wise from any of the Philly linebackers. But now we'll get to the meat of this show, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles defensive backfield. I'm talking cornerbacks, I'm talking safeties, and that has been a crutch. We have had cornerbacks that we thought were going to be great and have just ended up getting burned, and we gave up multiple touchdown games to, guys like Odell Beckham and Dez Bryant in the past. Because, of course, the NFC East was full of some good wide receivers for a while. Now, at safety, you're talking Malcolm Jenkins, always. And Rodney McLeod's coming back. They're not sexy options, but they are options. Malcolm Jenkins gives you 100% every time he steps on the field. Unfortunately, last year, it wasn't very fantasy amazing. He had 79 tackles, which is pretty darn good for a safety. But he didn't put much else in with that. He only had 1 interception last year. He only had 1 sack. Usually, he'll have a couple of interceptions. And, 1 year he had 2.5 sacks. That was his high. But there's been multiple years where he's had 10-plus pass defenses, too. And that is a nice bonus when you're talking about safeties. So, he can be a starter, but he is nothing amazing when it comes to fantasy. So, what am I talking about when it gets to the defensive backfield? I know not every league needs you to play cornerback, but I have a good feeling about a couple of guys this year when it comes to cornerbacks on the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, like I said earlier, you're not going to have to spend a draft pick really on any of these guys. And that's a good thing. You can, take a chance on somebody you've got a good feeling about. And then these guys, they're going to be on the waiver wire. The only guy that might not be on the waiver wire is R.I.D.E. But he probably will be because he's had issues. That's as simple as I can put it. But when he is on the field, oh my goodness, he is such a good fantasy player. He, over the last few years, has been hurt. 2018, 2017, he was hurt, but he still got 30 and 39 tackles those years. And then when he was on the field all year, 60 and 62 tackles as a defensive back, cornerback. And when you're playing fantasy, you're not actually trying to get the greatest quarterback on the field. If you had Richard Sherman during his years, that's not who you wanted because they weren't passing the ball his way, so you weren't able to get statistics. Well, for whatever reason, R.I.D.E. gets picked on a lot, and he gets tackles, and he gets a couple interceptions, and he gets a lot of pass deflections. So when it comes to points in fantasy, he's good. I have had him on at least one team ever since he came into the league as a rookie with the Buffalo Bills, and I have stuck with him because it doesn't take much to get him, and he gives you the points. Now, obviously, when he gets hurt, you got to deal with it. But cornerback is a position that you can find on the waiver wire. That's why I am saying you should probably just wait, and you could get one of these guys. Now, that's about it for the Philadelphia Eagles. There's not a lot of great options when it comes to defense for the Philadelphia Eagles. Fletcher Cox, always. You're going to have to spend a higher pick to get him. Malcolm Jenkins, you won't have to. Nigel Bradham, you won't have to. If you want to take a chance on somebody like Malik Jackson, coming over from the Jaguars, he's not a bad option. He's had multiple seasons with 6+ sacks. It's entirely possible he could do that again because guess what? They're going to put all their focus on Fletcher Cox. So I guess to summarize, you've got some really strong options in Fletcher Cox, and then you've got okay options in Malcolm Jenkins and Nigel Bradham and possibly Malik Jackson. The guys I'm excited about that could get you a bunch of fantasy points are actually in that defensive backfield. The other guys in that defensive backfield, those Russell Douglas, Sidney Jones, Jalen Mills. Jalen Mills had a pretty good year a couple years back. So there's a lot, Avonte Maddox. And they've got Andrew Sendejo, who could be a starter on some other teams. So if Rodney McLeod, gets hurt or isn't producing like they should, Andrew Sendejo might see the field a little bit more. They also added Blake Countess, who's probably going to be more of a special teams depth kind of player. But one of those defensive backs is going to come out and be a great fantasy option this year because I do believe the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be scoring a lot more points than they kind of did last year. They were okay, but nothing special. This year, they have got an offense that could keep the other team's defense on the field a lot, which means then if they are scoring those points, the other team's offense is going to have to pass more. So these Eagles defensive backs might be in for a lot of targets against them, which could equal a lot of tackles. So there you have it. Breakdown of the entire Eagles defense. I may or may not do this when I do the next one. I like doing single players, but I couldn't pick one favorite from the Eagles. You guys know that. So you got a little taste of them all. So if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe, click the bell, get notified when we have a new one of these. If you're listening, thank you for listening. Give us a nice little review or subscribe wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find us on Facebook.com/FantasyFuel, Twitter @FantasyFuel. Don't forget, we are going to be at the Midwest Fantasy Football Expo August 18th, noon to 6. There's going to be all sorts of stuff going on there. We're talking about doing a charity draft between a lot of the industry people there, and we are going to be a part of that, so that's going to be cool. And everybody's playing for a different charity, so that'll be awesome. Whoever wins is donating that to their charity of choice. That's always a good thing. We'll be out there. Of course, John Castillo from Pole Sports is going to be with us, so if you want to come out there and see us, you can go to MidwestFFExpo.com. Use the code FUEL to get $5 off your ticket, and we would be more than happy to see you and talk with you there. We'll be recording some stuff. If you guys are out there, that should be pretty fun. If you guys are into weird news, I do another podcast with a couple of guys called Average Joe Show. Yeah, it gets pretty off the rails when we do that one. SayItProductions.com. He's got a bunch of different shows there. We normally record Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you're into audio dramas, check me out on The Veiled Monarch. I play a character called Isaac Carrillo. Well, that's going to do it. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, I guess that's it. What a ride, huh?